Okay, recording should be good. And I will share my screen. So today's mainly going to be focused on reinforcing everything we've learned. And don't want an infinity mirror. Everything we've learned in the past couple days. So some of the main topics we cover, and I'll actually get a project started here so I can write them in a notes. Let me just get that up. I wanted to open my terminal there really badly. I'll start a README file so I can write this down. And these are the more important topics we want to be focused on this week. Variables in JavaScript. How do we declare them? And how to use them. This is a really important topic, and I'll actually put this as a heading. Let's see if I can get some of this yellow to go away. There we go. And I'll make these bullets. Do your magic prettier. All right. Okay, no indentation. Got it. All right, so we did variables in JavaScript, and that's not a bullet. Sorry about that. Variables, how to declare them, how to use them. And just to recap on what they look like, there are three possible ways to declare a new variable in JavaScript. And a variable is a way to store information that you can use repeatedly throughout your application. The first way to create a variable is the let keyword. So I could say let username, or we'll make that all lowercase. We can assign that to anything we want. This is, this case, assigned to a string. And this is a code comment here. Remember, code comments are entirely ignored by JavaScript. This line is only to be read by other developers or by future you. So this is a really handy tool. This works the same way it does in HTML. If you have a lot of code that you need to put together, you want to break it apart using code comments, just kind of labeling all of your stuff so that you have everything, sectioned off. It makes it a lot easier to keep it organized. So this is one method of declaring a variable. Here is another method of declaring a variable. We'll say another user equals, and we'll put a Bob in here because it's easy to spell. And the last way to declare a variable is with this var keyword. And this is deprecated. We no longer use this method. I show it because I still find it in documentation. Even in modern documentation on modern frameworks, it still shows up. And when I run into it, I just replace it with the word let, and everything works fine. I haven't ran into any instances from documentation where the var keyword actually breaks code. It could happen, though. There are some cases where scoping variables can change. It is possible you could work in a code base where this could break things if you change it, but I recommend changing it anyway and seeing what happens. Don't push to production. And I'll just put some sort of string here. Actually, let me put a number here. I'll say my num is equal to 3. That'll work. And then I'll just close off this little code block I made here. So this is just the markdown syntax for making a code block. Yes, Iris, you have a question.
Yes. Can you put the screen a little bit bigger?
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, no problem. Is that good?
A little bit more. There you go. Yes, sir.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, remember, this is just a markdown syntax here, these 3 backticks. And I put the language that I want the syntax highlighting to work in. So because I'm in a markdown file, I just put these 3 backticks in the language. And I can write JavaScript in here. And then if I look at the preview, you can see that little code block over there. So that's all that the 3 backticks are for, just for markdown syntax. The actual JavaScript is these 3 lines. Everything outside of that is not JavaScript. This is just an example of how to do variables. So while we're on the topic of variables, I want to talk about functions because this is a really confusing topic. Functions are probably one of the hardest things to actually understand inside of JavaScript. And I'm actually going to make this an H2. There we go. So functions, let me just put this as a heading, because there's something about functions that are tightly related to variables. There's actually a couple things. And the first thing I want to talk about, because again, I just talked about variables and the 3 ways to declare them, is parameters in functions. So when we declare a new function, we do that using the function keyword. We say function, and then we put in the name of whatever we want our function to be. And this can be anything that's not reserved. So I can call my greeting is this name for this function. You can go as long as you want with these. They're not typically going to be this long. I'm just showing you that they can literally be anything you want. And also I wanted to really highlight on this casing here. And actually this should be a capital I. Every other word starts with a capital letter except for the first word. The first word is lowercase. Everything else is a capital letter. So just remember that casing. That is camel casing. And I'm also going to throw in my little syntax highlighting here. There we go. So this is the function name. After you write the word function and then your function name, the next thing you do is you put parentheses. And inside of these parentheses is where you declare parameters. Think of parameters as another way to declare variables, because parameters are just that. They are variables that you're declaring. And after the parameters, we put a code block. This is going to look similar to what we do in CSS. We put our curly brackets, and then I press the enter key and I can start writing code inside of the function. And just like in CSS, if I wanted to work on the body, everything within the curly brackets is isolated to the name of this function. So let's go back to these parameters now. I said these are variables, and nobody calls them that, but that's essentially what they do. They allow you to take a word, any word you want, for example, username, another user, or my num in this case here, and you can plug those into these parentheses, and you're essentially declaring new variables. So let me just go ahead and plug some in here. I'm going to put in, I'll put in the names, or just the word student. This is declaring a new variable named student. So essentially, if I were on line 19, I could say let student equal Bob, for example, again. This is declaring a new variable named student. This down here is declaring a new variable named student. No, but they're not the same thing exactly, because this variable is only accessible inside of these curly brackets. It only exists in here. Now, I haven't determined what student is equal to yet. I could technically do that here. I could say equals Bob like that. And this is technically valid. We'll talk about why at a later date. We can do that. I just want to make it really clear that student is currently a variable that doesn't have a value. So something else you can do up here, and I'm going to show you this again with variables. If I want to, I can create a variable called my name and just put a semicolon here. And this is also declaring a variable without a value. This is just an undefined variable. This is just an undefined variable. It doesn't have a value yet. But I know in the future, this is going to have a variable. And I know that that variable is going to be a string, and that string is going to be somebody's name. I don't know what that name is going to be yet. I haven't determined that. And it could change potentially if I call this function more than once. But I do know that it will be a name. So I'm going to create just a console.log inside of this function that just says hello as a string. And then I'm going to concatenate that with whatever the student name is, which again, I don't know what it is yet. I just formatted, that's why that all moved. I don't know what the student name is yet because it's an undeclared variable, but let's go ahead and declare that variable now by calling the function. So this is a function declaration. Notice the function keyword, and I'll put a comment here. Now I'm going to call the function. Or another word you'll hear me say all the time is invoke the function. It means the exact same thing. These are the same word. They're just another way of saying the same thing. So I'm actually going to put this call/invoke, just because I use the words interchangeably all the time. So how do we call the function? Well, we put the function name, and it would be my greeting, And I'm just going to copy and paste it because it's a really long name. And then we need to pass it whatever the definition of student is. So we actually declare student at this time. So here we're saying there's going to be something called student, but we're not giving it a value. We're just saying eventually this is going to be a string. I don't know what the student's name is yet, but I'll let you know when I find out. So here I just found out. I'm going to go ahead and tell it the name of the student. The student's name is going to be, in this case, I'll put my own name in here just because I know how to spell it. And this function will now say, hello, Lewis. And notice the space here too, because we're using concatenation. It will say hello, Lewis when this is invoked. So student at this time on line 25 is equal to Lewis, but only on line 25. After line 25 is executed, it's no longer going to be assigned to Lewis. So I can put Bob here. On line 26, student is assigned to Bob. I can put a different name in here. We'll throw a Steve in there. So there's 3 different declarations of the same variable. Student is equal to Lewis. Student is equal to Bob. Student is equal to Steve, but only for about a split second as this function executes. The function will execute on line 25. It'll say, hello, Lewis. It'll execute again on line 26. It'll say, hello, Bob. It'll execute again on line 27 and say, hello, Steve. So notice how this parameter is being declared as the function is being called or invoked. That's the only time it works, is whenever it's called. Otherwise, this is just undefined. So if I were to call this function my greeting, let me just paste that in there again, it's still on my clipboard. And let's say I don't pass anything in here. I just invoke the function empty like that. This is still an invocation because I have the parentheses here saying invoke it. And that's what makes it invoked, is these parentheses. But I never passed an argument to it. I never told it what student's going to be equal to. So what this will say instead is hello undefined, because this is undefined at that time. So if you don't pass something in, it doesn't throw an error. It can handle that situation. At least it usually doesn't throw an error. There are some cases where it could. But with a string like this, and we're just concatenating with another string, it can figure that out. It'll just convert the word undefined into the string undefined and concatenate hello with undefined. And that'll still work the same. So that is the function call and the function declaration. So before I move on, I want to make sure, does anyone have any questions at all about function declarations and function invocations? This is one of the most confusing topics at the beginning. I see these get mixed up all the time. I'll say something to a student, helping them, and I'll say, hey, can you go ahead and invoke that function? And they write the function keyword, and it's like, no, that's declaring a new function. We want to call your current function that you already made. And one of the other things that are really difficult about functions is understanding, why would you ever need repeatable code like this? This is just one line of code. I can just rewrite this over and over and over again and put the new names in it. You can, but what happens when your function is 200 lines long? Let's say you bring in a name and then you're using this name inside of this function. I'm going to write some pseudocode inside of here just to kind of show you what can happen with all of this. So I'm actually going to make a whole new function here. So this will be a new line function. And what I'm going to do is simulate a real application. Maybe it's going to be like a social media application. So we're going to say get user data. This could be a function you use in your app, and it's not going to take in. Actually, yeah. Let me put in a parameter. We'll say user. I don't necessarily need to do this, but I'll do it. And now I need to write out some pseudocode because I don't want to get into like the technical details behind databases and that right now, but I just want to show you why you would need a function in JavaScript. So first thing you'd want to do, you would say, if the user exists, and I'm going to do this as code comments so that it doesn't throw a bunch of syntax errors. There's a way to do multi-line comments in JavaScript. If you have 2 slashes like this, you can put stars like that, and you can write comments in between those. So you can do multiple lines of code comments. So I'm going to write my pseudocode in here. So I'm going to say, if user exists. Look up user details, return posts to this function, add posts to document, check for comments on the posts, and then end function. So this is some really bad pseudocode, but this is just to show you, why you might have a repeatable block of code like this. So the first thing you're doing is in your function, you're saying, check to see if this user exists. If they do exist, look them up, get their user details, and then return all of the posts this person made. So we're going to go to like a database. We're going to retrieve them using JavaScript. And then we're going to, use like the document .get element by ID. And then we're going to set the inner HTML, and we're going to add all of those posts to the DOM using this piece here. And then we're going to go back to the database. We're going to check to see if there's any sort of code comments. And then we're going to append all of those comments to the posts. And then we can end this function at that time. So what happens when you have a million users on your application? You're not going to write out that logic a million different times for everybody. So instead, you just call this function, you pass their name in, and it just automates that whole process. It'll just redo all of that over again. So for now, we're just doing these simple console.log statements, but this will grow, this will expand, and this does get more complex as we go. So this is how you declare your function. This is just some pseudocode in here. And then every time you wanted to use this, you would just call the function get user data. And then you would pass in, whoever you want to look up. Here's Steve. And then we go get Steve's posts and we add them to the page. And we do all of this stuff that's happening inside of that function. Are there any questions about that? All right. So this is function declarations. Let's talk about another topic that you want to be familiar with. And this is your basic operators for JavaScript. So operators, I think the best way to demonstrate operators is actually just going to the documentation. This is one of those things where it can actually vary from language to language. So let me see if I can actually get MDN to show up inside of a, no, it doesn't work in a markdown file. Let me just create a script.js. I'm just being lazy, and I'm going to use my tools to open MDN for me. Let me just type alert. This one will work. There we go. All right, so operators. Now actually, you know what? I'm going to actually go to W3 Schools. I like their format better for operators. It's decent on the MDN, but there's just too much information right now. So I'm going to go to W3 Schools, and just so we can see the different operators. So this is the assignment operator. It's just an equal sign. This is for assigning variables. We have our addition operator, multiplication and comparison. I'm just going to steal this and throw it into my notes because I think it's useful. Just put that right there. And I would like to put hyphens in here. There we go. There's more. Let me scroll down. So we have our comparison operators. We can see that listed there. We have our assignment operators, arithmetic. But let's keep going down and we'll look at this little table here. So these are the main ones you're going to want to know. Addition, subtraction, multiplication, exponents. I don't like the word they use there, exponentization. You used to have to use a external function. That's why it says ES16, 2016 here. This stands for ECMAScript 2016. ECMAScript is the company or organization. I don't think it's a company. It's like an organization that basically updates JavaScript. You may hear JavaScript referred to as ECMAScript as an alternative language name. But JavaScript actually has a little bit more to it than ECMAScript. There's a few more rules added into it. But for the most part, they're the same thing. So this is referring to the 2016 update of JavaScript. Here we have our division, modulus. believe it or not, this is really useful. I use this quite often for, random things. Like if I am selecting every other row in a table, for example, this here, I can use modulus and say grab all the even numbered tables or rows and then change them all to gray. So, and that could be a solution they used here. You can also do that with CSS. There's some stuff in there for that. It does basically the same thing, but yeah, modulus is actually pretty useful because of this division remainder thing. It can get you odds and evens. So if you do modulus 2, whatever the number is divided by 2, but using the modulo operator, if it returns 0, then it has no remainder. That means it's an even number. If it returns 1, it has a remainder. So it's an odd number. So any number modulo 2 is going to tell you odds or evens. Really, really handy. Increment and decrement. I use increment all the time. I pretend like I use decrement, but I don't really ever use it. I just change my logic around so that I can increment instead of subtract. But yeah, it's definitely useful. This just takes your current value. Let's say you have a variable assigned to the number 10, and you can tell it to count down backwards. So you can go 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. So I guess if you wanted a stopwatch, the opposite of a stopwatch, if you wanted a timer, you could use the decrement operator for that. Increment would be the stopwatch. It's going to increase by 1 every single time it ticks. And there's actually a chapter on that in there. That's pretty cool. Here we have some more. And this is giving you the exact, like, how these work. These are shorthand operators. I do use these quite often, especially plus equals. Plus equals is probably the most common shorthand I use. There are edge cases where maybe times equals would also be useful, or this one here. If you're trying to get like a factor tree or something like that, you might use this division equals. But what this does is exactly what you see on the right over here. So let's say you have the value of x and you want a plus equals y. This is going to actually convert to x equals x plus y. Let me show this in code because I think this is easier to see written out. And I'm going to do it up here in the variable section. So if I have, for example, let my number, I'm going to assign this to 5. And let's say I want to add 3 to that. I could say my number is equal to my number plus 3. So remember, if you look at this, this evaluates to the number 5. So what I'm saying is 5 plus 3 on the right side of the equal sign, this would be 8. So this is now 8. So my number is currently 8 at this point in time. So where that is useful is instead of writing out the variable name again with the plus 3, you can skip this part and just put a plus sign here, plus equals 3. And it does the exact same thing. It's just a shortcut. I think it's handy. I use it all the time. You can also use it for strings, which is useful. For example, down here, I could extract this out. And I could say my string, let my string. And we assign this to hello plus student. And then maybe I want to add on one more piece to this. I could say let my string plus equals, and then add another string to this. Welcome back. And what this will actually do is, and sorry, I can't have let there twice, or that will actually break. I could say my string is going to be, and this is assuming that student is my name. This is what that would output. It would build this string here. And let me put this in quotes so we can see that this is a string. So we could build this string using this plus equals thing. It's just another way to add things together. And so I took my string and I'm reassigning it back to itself plus another string. So it's just a shortcut. It would be the exact same thing as me writing my string equals my string plus welcome back. Just a shortcut. So I don't have to repeat the variable with the plus. Because my string at this line here to the right of equals is currently equal to this at this point, it's going to take this plus this, which would build this. So hopefully that makes sense. And then again, the shortcut for that is to remove this, my string plus, put the plus here, and it's the exact same thing. So looking at this documentation, that's what it's showing here. We have plus equals. It says x plus equals y, which means x equals x plus y. Exact same thing. Hopefully that's helpful. One of those things where you use it a few times and it's definitely easy to get. Here is all of the different comparison operators. I use all of these quite often. This one's a really tricky one. This is actually, and I always say it ternary, but I know it's ternary. So if you hear me say ternary, that's what I'm talking about. This one here is basically an if-else statement, which is pretty cool that it's built in like this. It's another shorthand thing. I'll teach that way later because it's probably the most confusing thing you'll see right now. Let's move down. I think that's good. Yeah, we hit all of them. These logical operators also useful. The logical not, or, an and. I know I showed one of you at least the and operator. This is the way we did it in pseudocode. We would say, you know, less than 5 and greater than 10, for example. This allows you to combine Boolean statements together. So let me just show that quickly. We could say if, and let me put this in a JS block. My num is greater than 10 and my num is less than 20. Console.log. My num is between 11 and 19. So you can combine your if statements using this and operator. Instead of having two if statements like we did for the jacket exercise where we say, you know, less than 20 or less than 30, less than 20. You can, if you need them all in one line, like if you're only going to have one output for that, you can just combine them together. You don't have to have two nested if statements. You can just say and this. And then you also have the or operator in there. You can say if it's greater than 10 or less than 20. So that would be anything that's not between those numbers then, using that or operator. And then not is a pretty interesting one. This actually reverses a Boolean. I'm actually going to show this with code. Okay, I think this is going to behave. Nope. All right, it should behave now. So if I say, let me go to a different tab. There we go. If I say console.log and I place inside of here, 5 is equal to 5, then we should know that this is going to return true. And we see that. But what happens if I were to put an exclamation point here and send that? Now we get false. So what this is doing is that it's actually reversing a Boolean. So if I say console.log false, we can see false. But if I put an exclamation point in front of it, it reverses it to true. So you can reverse a Boolean, and there are definitely good use cases for that. Sometimes your logic requires you to say things like, if there's no user, and we've seen that earlier when I was checking to see if the user exists, it's exactly how I would do that. I would say something like, if user.exists, we'll say that this is a method on it. If the user does not exist is how you would put it with the exclamation point. So this just reverses it. So we're saying if the user does not exist because I have the logical not operator in front of that. If I remove that, now it's if the user exists. If I add it, it's if the user doesn't exist. So hopefully that makes sense. That is just a simple operator to reverse your logic. These are a bit more complex. This is more of a computer science type thing. They are definitely useful. It's one of those things that I would recommend studying at some point, but I would probably wait till after level 4 when you're, still exploring new technologies on your own or working in the industry. Start picking up this type of stuff. This could relate closely to a topic called data structures and algorithms, which I will, help you get into because I think it's a really useful thing to know, especially if you want to work at a big company. They will often ask you data structure related questions in the interviews. So I'll show you how to get kind of started with DSA. But these topics here specifically, I'm not going to be covering in class. They are really useful though. They are cool, but you'd have to know a little bit more about things like binary and how to convert decimal to binary, and then how many bits are in a byte and a lot of that IT related stuff, and even like how data transmits over the internet to really, grasp what to do with this stuff here. But just so you know that this stuff is useful, and I can provide resources on where you can study this, but it's not something we can study until we know more about JavaScript first. And then we also have this cool exercise on here. This is something too I recommend that everyone do this weekend. Hop on this website and click start the exercise and just run through these. You have JavaScript variables here, operators, data types, and functions. So 1, 2, 3, and 4 categories you can work on this, W3 Schools. And this will review everything that we've covered this week. So if you get a chance this weekend, hop on here and knock this out. And this is very close to what you did with MIMO. So if you've got a lot of value out of MIMO, then you should get a lot of value out of this W3 Schools exercise as well. All right, let me get back into my notes. So far I've been doing everything inside of this README file. None of this is real code yet. So I think it could be a good time to, build something out that's a little bit more useful when it comes to JavaScript here. So I'm actually going to build like a simple little app. It's going to be like a little game, and it's going to use the DOM. It's going to use input from a user. I'll just use prompts for now. I don't want to wire up forms just yet. And it's going to be like a guess the number game. This is like one of the early type of games that everyone makes in JavaScript. So I'll show you how to build one of these. So you can practice this is a good way to, to study this sort of thing. So let me start from scratch here. I'm going to close this README file. I'll get rid of this alert. I'll just use that to cheat a little bit. So I'm going to create my index.html. So in here, we put our boilerplate. Doesn't matter what we've put the title. I'll just leave it as default. In the body, I'm going to put a script and set the src. And for my src, I'm going to put in my script.js. So hopefully we're all pretty comfortable with linking things in. And it's the same process if you wanted to link in a CSS. You use the word link with your CSS. So we don't have any CSS to put in here right now. Also, I'm just going to throw like an H1 on the page because I don't like staring at a blank white page. I just like to have something over there that shows me that this thing's kind of working. And we'll just say guess the number, just like that. And then I need to put a div or a paragraph element or anything that would allow me to inject some sort of JavaScript into my HTML. And I usually use a div for this. Sometimes I have them all over my page. You might see me do stuff like this. I'll say like guess the number, and then I could put comma. I could put a span here. And then I can give this an ID of user. And then I could inject my username here into the span because I have an ID on it. And we already know about get element by ID. So this is one way to do that. And then I would have some sort of comment inside of the span that would say JS goes here, or whatever you want to put. You don't have to have comments, but if you wanted to, you could. So, and this just kind of shows what that would look like. So I could say guess the number, and then my name could show up here using JavaScript. So you can put these spans all throughout your document with IDs on them, and then use get element by ID to inject inner HTML or inner text to that. So if you're wondering how to do that, that is the approach to it. I'm just going to put it on this div, and I'm going to say, I'll just call it output. It doesn't matter what we name these IDs as long as they kind of describe what this does. All right, so there is our output div. So the next thing I need to do is create a variable. Sorry, use strict. We always have to put the string use strict at the top. Don't forget to do that. And then once you do it, just forget you ever did it because you don't have to worry about it. It's one of those things where you set it and forget it and it just works. All right, so the first thing we want to do for a guess the number game is going to be get a random number. And then we need to get users guess. We will need to, let's see what else we can do here to make this interesting. I will do a like display welcome message, I guess. Could do that. Yeah, I'm going to leave it. I'm going to leave this off. I'll keep it as simple as possible for today. We're going to need a function. So that'll be there. And let me just make these all to do so we can see that these are things I haven't done yet. And I'm just using the control / to get these code comments. And then I'm just kind of planning out how I want to write this. So inside of the function, we also need a to do for how does the logic going to work. So we're going to have to say, check if guess is correct. We'll do this first. If it is correct, we will output correct. Prettier just formatted that on me. Oh, well. Next to do is check if guess is too high. And then we're going to output too high. To do, check if guess is too low. Output too low. Once we have all of this, we should be able to see the message on screen, and we can essentially, we'll have to do this based on refresh. So once we have all of this, we'll be able to refresh the page and then see the output on the page. And all of this should just kind of work for us. So let's see, we have the output script here. So let's start with getting a random number. This one's a little tricky. This isn't something I've shown how to do, and this isn't something that anyone really remembers how to do right away. So I'm going to show you what to do when you don't know what to do. And that is Google it. This is one of those things that's different in every programming language. There is the docs here. We have this math.random thing, and I'll just click on this and show you. This has a lot of information. It has a function here that we could use. It says get random int, and then it has how it works. Let's look at around though and see what else we have. JavaScript random. This is just very basic math.random. The way this function actually works is it returns a number between 0 and 1. So it's a decimal. So you have to do a bunch of stuff to it in order to get it to be useful. So like here you can see they're multiplying the math.random by 10, and then they're using this math.floor to round down. It's actually a truncating method. Not that that's that important. Returns a random integer 0 to 10, and that's just math.random times 11. Returns a random integer 0 to 99. So this is a really good place to find what you need, is just going on to W3 Schools. And I got a bunch of samples for random numbers. If you want to do 1 to 100, it shows how to do that here. So I think this is a good enough this is decent enough for what we need. So we can work with this, but I want to just show you, some of the other resources out here. Stack Overflow is what I was actually looking for. And here's a question with 2,553 likes. So this is a good question. And then we have an answer with 4,000 likes. And they talk about how to get random numbers. This one includes a minimum and a maximum. And they show the formula for that there using this function. So really good resource for Stack Overflow. And it also explains how all of this works. So feel free to read through this if you're really interested in, the behind the scenes on this. But if you just want a solution that works, then just hop on either W3 Schools or MDN and just grab the code and use it. So in this case here, I'm going to go to 1 to 10. I think that's a pretty good place to start. I'm just going to copy that code. And I'm going to paste it right here. So this isn't doing anything for us yet. So what I'm going to do is console.log this output here. Let me delete that semicolon. And that's probably hard to read, so let me actually put this into a variable first. So I'm going to use the let keyword. That's just out of habit there. So we're going to let the random number, and we're going to assign it to this formula we got from W3 Schools. And now I'm going to console.log my random number. This works the exact same way that I just had it a little bit ago, where I had this directly inside of the console.log. But this is a little bit easier to read, so I'm going to do it this way with the variable. One way isn't more correct than the other. Let's see our output now. We'll hit go live. And then I got to delete this script.js out of my URL. And let's inspect. So I see the number 10. It was refresh. 2, refresh. 3. I'm just going to keep refreshing, and you can see that that random number is changing every single time. So this is all we need to do to get a random number. As far as the math goes, I could break this down to make this more readable if we wanted to. Let me just kind of extract some of this stuff. So here's a function called math.floor. This is truncating down to the nearest whole number, essentially. So if you have 5.9, it's going to be 5. If you have 4.9, it's going to be 4. It always rounds down to the nearest whole number, math.floor. There's also a math.ceil, and I always spell that backwards, I after E. Math.ceil does the opposite. So if it's 5.1, it'll round up to 6. So it'll always round up to the nearest. And then there's also like a math.round, which does your normal rounding. For this math thing here, we're going to use math.floor. What number are we going to floor? We're going to floor math.random. Math.random is a function that returns a number between 0 and 1. It's a decimal. So that could be something like 0.53892, and it just goes on forever. It's a huge decimal. So because we're math.flooring, it's going to round down. So what we need to do is multiply this by 10. When we multiply by 10, it moves the decimal place on this random number. So that becomes, instead of like 0.5, it'll just become 5 point whatever. And because we're using math.floor on that, that'll just become 5. And then we add 1 to that, and it'll never be 0. So that's how that kind of works. And if you didn't follow me there, if the math was, a little bit too fast for you, don't worry about it. It's not that important. The important thing is that this does math.random. This gives you a random number. You can always look this up. It's publicly available. It's not something you need to memorize. So here is our random number. So this to do is done. Next thing we need to do is retrieve the guess from the user. So how do we get something from the user? Well, I showed you how to do this with prompt. So we'll say let guess equals prompt, call the prompt function. What number do you think I am thinking of? Or something like that. Some sort of friendly message. What number do you think I am thinking of? I don't like the wording of that. What number will you guess? I like the wording of that one better. What number will you guess? Okay, so that is getting our user input, another to-do done. Now we need to define a function to check to see if the guess from the user was correct. So we're going to say function. I'll call it checker parameters and code block. I can always come back and add parameters if I'm not sure. This is the syntax you want to follow first. Put a function name, put the function keyword, a function name, parentheses, curlies, in that order. So you only have to remember 4 things for declaring a new function. Function keyword, whatever you want to call it, parentheses, curlies. This is a function declaration. And then you can open this up. So our checker function can use these variables up here. So we don't need to pass parameters to it. I'll just have it use them. Let's see. Let's move these into the function now. And I'll put a little bit of space between them so we can work on each one. So first thing we need to do is to check if the guess is correct. So we're going to say if random number is equal to guess. So there's one problem here that I'm already seeing, which you're not going to be aware of until I tell you this. But when you use prompt, the data type of prompt is string. No matter what you type in, if I type in the number 5, it's going to return 5 as a string. So when I'm saying random number, this is a number, this is a string. These will never be equal. So what we have to do is actually turn this into a number as we get it. And the easiest way to really do that is to put a plus sign in front of whatever you want to be a number, and that just makes it a number. This is the easiest way to do it, but it's not the most obvious way to do it, because anyone looking at my code, including some senior developers, don't even know about this trick. This is kind of a niche trick that I use all the time, but I wanted to share it because I like it. If you want a number, you just put a plus sign in front of it, and it's a number. Let me go to the internet again here, and we're going to say convert number to we're going to convert string to int. We'll call it number because that's what it is in JavaScript. Convert string to number JavaScript. And now we have a Stack Overflow post. How do I convert a string to an integer in JavaScript? That's exactly what we want to know. The simplest way is to do this. So they have this number function with a capital N. Notice there's a capital N there. And they're passing a string as the argument to it, and they're storing that into a variable. So that's actually going to convert it to a number. So what does that look like in code? We could do this. We could say number, and then we put number around this, and that works. The problem with this approach is if they don't put anything in there, you can't convert null to a number. So you're going to get something weird. So, and it's also hard to read. So what I'm going to do is create a second variable. I'm going to say guess as number equals number, and we can pass in our guess. So now we have this new variable that's taking the old variable and turning it into a number. So this is something that's valid. You could do this if you want to, and then instead of this down here, you pass in and guess as number. And I'm going to show you another way to do it. This is the way I'm actually going to finally do it. Instead of this, instead of creating the separate variable and passing the new variable down, I'm just going to take what's to the right of this equal sign and use that instead. Because whatever you're assigning to a variable, you don't have to assign it to the variable. You can use it directly wherever you need it. So, and that includes this prompt. If I wanted to, I could put the prompt inside of my function and use it directly in the function. Same with the random number. I could take this here on the right side of the equal sign and replace it with this if statement, and it would still work the same. But I want to use some variables for readability. I just want to make it aware that you can do that. All right. So I'm going to delete this to do. We created a to do function. And now we're saying if it's correct, then we need to output something. So how do we output in JavaScript? Well, there's a few ways to do it. We have alerts, we have we have console logs, but I said earlier I wanted to use this div. So I'm going to document.getElement by ID, document.getElement by ID. And this is another function. I invoke the function with parentheses, and it takes in a string as parameter. The string is going to be output. I'll just copy and paste that into there. So what is document.getElement by ID? What does this reduce to when this function is called? This actually reduces to the element that's in your DOM. So if I go to the web page, I just close this. I'm going to inspect here, open my body up. It's actually referencing this element. Let me show that with a console log so we can see what I'm talking about, because that probably makes no sense at all. I set let element equal, and I can name this variable whatever I want. Console.log. We're going to console log the element. Refresh, cancel. Oh, I didn't invoke the function, right? So it's called checker. I'll just call it right here. And my if statement, let me move this out of the if statement. Try this one more time. I apologize for that. Checker. Element is not defined. Oh, let me refresh this again. I'm betting my prompt was messing that up. There we go. So I just wanted to really show you this. The document.getElement by ID returned this element. So what is this element? And you can actually see that pointing onto the left side of my screen over there. There's like a little tooltip that shows up. It's an element that is 1,368 by 0 pixels in dimensions, and the 0 just makes it so it's invisible. If I wanted to, I could, edit this inside of my elements panel, and I could put content in it. And we see that show up there. And I could also just do the same thing with JavaScript. So that's what that is, document.getElement by ID. And let me undo some of this stuff. I had to get it out of the if statement. Otherwise, the only way you could see it is if I guessed the random number. Because I'm not actually doing the game yet, this will never show up. So let element, we can delete the let here. So that is the element. So I want to access the inner HTML, and I want to assign this to some HTML. And I'm going to use the backticks to create my HTML. And I'm going to create a paragraph element, and we're going to say, you win. And you don't get the autocomplete. So if you want to, you can do that in here and then copy and paste it into here. So this will work for the winner. Let me try it. The only problem is the only way we're going to see it is if it's going to be correct. And I'm just going to keep putting 5 in until we see it show up on the page. And then I have to refresh until I get it right. Every time I refresh, it changes the number. So that's why I just keep using the same number over and over and over again. I might reduce the odds, or sorry, increase the odds by reducing the range of numbers. Oh, I'm not even invoking the function. So that's the last thing I need to do. Otherwise, this will never work. Checker, call the function. Now it'll actually check to see if we won. And there we go. We got it. 5, you win. So that is working. Let's do the other ones. What if the guess is too high? You can say else if, and then we remove this to do. So it's done. I'm just going to copy this and paste it into here. So we don't want to know if it's equal to. We want to know if the guess is too high. So we're going to say if the guess is, if the random number is less than the guess, then the guess is too high. I wish I would have switched them and put the number on the left, but that's okay. We'll just copy and paste our output and say, you lose, it was lower. Again, I have to think about that because if my guess is less than the random number, then the random number is higher. So my guess is less than, the random number is less than my guess. I keep, see, I need to reverse these, messes with me. I'll leave it like this though, because I've already written it. You lose, it was lower. And then I can even add in here if I want to. I could say the number was, just to make sure we have this right, put $ curly brackets. Since I'm using backticks, this works. And I'm going to put in random number here. So now we can actually see that output correctly. You lose, it was lower, the number was such and such. I'm actually just going to remove this, it was lower part and just reuse this piece. And then we have an else, and I'll just paste that there. So that should be all of the logic we need. So just walking through this line by line now, and I'm going to use as much terminology as I can because I want you to be familiar with the terminology as we go. The first thing I do is I declare a new variable. I assign the variable to this math.floor, math.random function. This will result in a random number, and this will be assigned to the random number variable. Next, I declare a variable called guess, and this is going to be assigned to the prompt function's output, which is whatever the user inputs. I declare a function here, and the function's purpose is to check if this is going to be a win, and then it's going to output the results to the DOM. The DOM is the document object model. It's basically your web page. If the random number guess is strictly equal to the guess as a number, then it will output you win. Else, if the random number is less than the number, sorry, the guess as a number, then it's going to output you lose and tell you the number. And the final result will also be the same thing. Alternatively, I could remove this else if statement here. And I could basically just say, if it's not strictly equal to the number, then the only other possibility is a lose. So actually part of this logic isn't necessary, but I'm going to leave it here. I'll just change up the message slightly so we have some different results here. So I will add back in lower and higher here. And I just hope that I'm thinking about these correctly. Just so that there's some difference between each of the outputs based on those conditions. Otherwise, I can just delete this else if and just use an else. So the else block, again, is our final condition, and it will just say you lose. It'll say it was higher. And then don't forget to invoke the function, as I did 3 times in a row. Make sure you invoke the function for this to actually run. Okay, so let's try it. I'm going to cancel and refresh. Which number will you guess? 4. You lose. The number was higher, and I have a capital H there. That's all right. 9. So I did think of that correctly. That's good. We'll try 4 again. The number was 10. Number was 3. So it was lower that time. So we see lower works. Higher. And I can just keep putting in 4 until we get it. I have a 10% chance. I might have to cheat. 6, 10. You win. There it is. Finally got it. So that's the guess the number game. Now this is one way to do it. We can get more complex. We can make it so you don't have to refresh. It can save the number and you can keep on guessing over and over and over again. And we'll learn how to do that when we learn loops. For now, we'll just do it with refresh pages and get that, a little bit of practice there. And this does technically review everything we covered. Plus I added in, how to find answers. Most of being a software developer isn't knowing how to code, it's knowing how to find answers to solve problems. So knowing how to do a random number, this is a built-in function that gives you something between 0 and 1. It's not exactly what we want. This is another function that tells you that this can truncate down. Yeah, that could be helpful. And then we do this little bit of math. You have to put all of this together in order to get that solution. So yes, they could just give us a random number function in JavaScript, but this gives us more power over that. This tells us that, it can be, 0 to 10. It can be 1 to 10. In our case, it's 1 to 10. It can be literally anything you want it to be. So this gives you unlimited possibilities. So that's why they kept it as loose as they did. Knowing each of these functioned individually doesn't solve the problem, but knowing how to find the answer does. And that's what you need to know how to do, is how to find the answers to solve problems. Knowing that this gives us input from a user is good, but knowing what to do with that input, that's what's important. What do we do when we actually get the prompt? What are we asking for from the user? Sure, we know how to use prompt, but how do we ask for what we want? So that's what we need to know how to do. Declaring a function, it doesn't do you any good if you don't know what content to put in it. So we just need to practice these things, and we need to be able to use resources to find answers to our questions. Speaking of which, does anyone have any questions before we do our break? I've covered a lot of stuff here. It's okay if you have questions. Anything in specific or non-specific would be fine. I'm actually going to fix this just a little bit, make this look a little nicer. The number was lower, the number was higher. Okay, let's start a 10-minute break. And then I just want to jump into a practice as soon as we get back. I'll start breakout rooms and we'll just dive into, practicing. I want to see if you've already completed the labs this week. I need to see that. I need to see your code running so I can give you some sort of feedback on it, making sure you're following best practices and making sure that works. So make sure that we can get an opportunity for that sometime if you're going to be available for that today. And then as far as if you got the labs done, see if you can come up with a solution to build the check this, the guess a number game, but do it with a loop so that this game doesn't just cause you to have to refresh. It'll keep asking you and you keep guessing until you get it right, and then the game ends. So if you're feeling like you're pretty far ahead right now, that's awesome. I'll give you something that can push you even further ahead, and that is the loops. The while loop in particular is the one I would use for this. If you want to have a set number of guesses, give them 3 guesses and then game over, you might want to use a for loop. So there's some information for you. But yeah, let's get our 10-minute break in, and then we'll get into that practice. So I'm going to leave my screen sharing for the break so that I don't know if there's a timer in the breakout rooms here. Let me see. I can't believe they haven't added the timer to this yet. They have everything else. So yeah, I'll just open up Google. We'll set up a timer. Yep, 2 is higher than null. Okay. 10-minute timer. And then I'll see everybody in 10 minutes. Okay, the timer ended. I had it muted, so I didn't get to hear the chime. All right, so before we do the breakout rooms, are there any questions? Okay, I'll just go ahead and open them up then. Let me stop the recording so that this isn't going to take forever to upload.